Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 687, and today is October 10th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We don't have a ton of news to get through on the show today, but some big stories I wanted to break down. So be sure to share today's show. You find it at the Libertarian Institute on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone_. Now let's get into the news. Big story today. U.S. thought risk of Russia using nuclear weapons was at 50% in 2022, new Bob Woodward but says. So, U.S. intelligence determined in September of 2022 that there was a 50% chance of Russia using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. A new book by journalist Bob Woodward alleges, the Washington Associated Press reported on Wednesday. According to the book titled War, the warning came in late September 22, with U.S. intelligence believing Russia could use a nuke if its forces were surrounded in Kherson City. Russia withdrew from the city not long after in November of 2022. The book says the warning caused alarm within the Biden administration as it moved the chance of Russia using a nuclear weapon from 5% or 10% way up to 50%. Around the same time, Biden said publicly that the risk of nuclear Armageddon was higher than it had been at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And, this does seem concerning because that means they had that assessment and they still went ahead with that offensive in that region of Ukraine that year. So it seemed like they knowingly risked the nuclear war, pushing Ukraine to go ahead with these attacks. So Biden told donors at a fundraiser in New York in October of 2022, "I don't think there is such a thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon. We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." Despite huge risk in nuclear war, Biden did not alter course on U.S. involvement in the proxy war, which has only escalated since then. The Woodward book says the U.S. issued several warnings and threats on the potential consequences of what would happen if Russia used a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Woodward says that Biden told the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to get on the line with the Russians, tell them what we will do in response. In September of 2022, Sullivan said publicly that Russia would suffer catastrophic consequences if it used a nuke, and said the U.S. conveyed that in private conversations. A few months later, the Wall Street Journal reported that Sullivan had been holding secret talks with Russian officials. The Woodward book says that Biden also sent messages to Putin that there would be catastrophic consequences if a nuke was used, but there would be no known contact between Biden and the Russian leader since Russia launched its invasion in February of 2022. The book says that when Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin spoke with then Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in October of 2022, he warned that any use of nuclear weapons on any scale against anybody would be seen by the United States and the world as a world-changing event. There is no scale of nuclear weapons that we could overlook or the world could overlook. The risk of the Ukraine proxy war turning nuclear is still a very high probability, as Putin ordered changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine in direct response from threats of Western escalation, specifically the idea of the U.S. and NATO using long-range strikes inside Russian territory. The U.S. appears poised to sign off on long-range strikes, but seems to have backed down, at least for now. And I think what we need to talk about here is how the White House handled this situation. And look, it may not be that there was a real chance or even a 50% chance that Russia was going to use nuclear weapons in 2022. It does seem like there's a real risk for that now. 50% in 2022, maybe that's a high assessment by the U.S. intelligence community. And of course, here at Conflicts of Interest, we are skeptical of the U.S. intelligence community and also Bob Woodward. The reason I thought this article was so important is that we have a lot of public statements from around this time, September, October, November 2022, and it does seem that the White House at least believed this intelligence community assessment, which, means the Woodward reporting is correct in the sense of all these events seem to did happen at the time that Woodward said. And so I think the critical thing to look at here is how the Biden administration responded to this. And so rather than ratcheting down or trying to level off tensions in the U.S. support for the proxy war in Ukraine, the Biden administration continued to escalate U.S. support for Ukraine through this time and helped Ukraine wage a counteroffensive in the fall of 2022 that ended up taking Kherson away from the Russians. Now, Russia has retaken some of this territory since and has been on the move in the Donbass and territory they seem far more interested in taking than Kherson, but still, the White House really seems to have been willing to roll the dice on nuclear weapons here, believing that threatening Russia that, if you use them, we will respond seemingly with nukes, was their strategy here, not in any sense of de-escalation or any meaningful negotiations are trying to balance this out. And so, I guess this is more relevant should Kamala Harris win the election over Trump. If Trump gets in, he'll have his own team of people who will probably handle these kind of situations a little bit differently. I don't want to say better, but you just may see different reactions in a different response. But of course, if Kamala Harris gets elected, you expect relatively the same foreign policy team to be intact in the White House, which means if we are again faced with this situation, they're likely going to take the same approach, which is just to threaten Russia and continue to ratchet up their support for Ukraine. And that could very much get us involved in a nuclear war. All right, next up here, French military to test ability for high-intensity conflict with Russia. So the French army is planning to test its ability to fight a high-intensity conflict with Russia during drills in Romania that are set to take place next year, Defense Post reported on Wednesday. French troops will participate in the large-scale drills, which are intended to practice a rapid deployment to NATO's eastern flank. The goal is for the French brigade to reach Bucharest in 10 days. General Bertrand Turc-Joyce, the head of the French Army's land command in Europe, made clear that the drills were about preparing for a future war with Russia, who he called the designated enemy. The general explained, "We used to play war, now there's a designated enemy, and we train with people whom we actually go to war." France has already has a goal to be ready to deploy battle-ready divisions of soldiers in 30 days. France and other NATO nations are openly preparing for a future war with Russia, despite the risk of the conflict quickly turning nuclear. A former Lithuanian prime minister and the European Union's first defense commissioner recently said that Europe must be ready to fight Russia within 6 to 8 years. Earlier in the year, French President Emmanuel Macron repeatedly called for NATO troops to be deployed to Ukraine and said that he was finalizing a plan to send French soldiers to the country to train Ukrainian troops. Macron appears to have backed down on that plan following repeated warnings from Russia that any French troops would be considered legitimate targets. On Wednesday, Macron visited a group of Ukrainian troops training in France for a photo op ahead of a visit from Ukrainian President Zelensky, who will arrive in France on Thursday. All right, next up here, this is an article I wrote for the Institute on October 9th. Hungary may delay G7's $50 billion loan to Ukraine until after U.S. election. And so we've been talking about this for over a year now. It seems that was finally going to happen, but now there appears to be another delay. So the Hungarian government announced it will seek to prevent a vote on the European Union's participation in a $50 billion Group of Seven loan to Ukraine. The G7 will use frozen Russian funds to pay off the loans. So French Minister Milhai Varga explained that Budapest wants the issue decided within the European Union after the U.S. elections, not before. He said, "We believe this issue, the prolongation of Russian sanctions, should be decided after the U.S. elections. We have to see which direction the future U.S. administration is going with this issue." So the $50 billion loan is a scheme designed by Washington and its allies in the G7 to give Ukraine a significant influx of cash without it coming directly from a Western government. The terms of the loan call for Ukraine to receive $50 billion, and then G7 countries that have a collective $200 billion in frozen Russian funds will use the interest generated to pay off the loan. However, Moscow's money is frozen a part of EU sanctions on Russia. Those sanctions are renewed every 6 months, and the loan will take several years to pay off. The White House has refused to sign off on the loan until the European Union extends the duration of the sanctions on Russia for at least 3 years. Earlier this week, Western officials said they believe that the loan could be approved sometime in October, meaning Kiev would have access to the funds by the end of the year. But Budapest bloc will push the loan back at least a week. It is unclear what Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban hopes will change by delaying the loan for a few weeks. Orban has attempted to create the conditions for Russia and Ukraine to come to the negotiating table with little success. The Hungarian leader has also spoken with former President Donald Trump and believes he may attempt to end the conflict between Moscow and Kiev if he returns to office. Orban's expectations that Trump may try to end the war may be misplaced. As president, Trump significantly increased Washington's support for Kiev by sending military aid to Ukraine. Additionally, earlier this year, Trump was crucial in breaking the congressional impasse over the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that authorized over $60 billion for Ukraine. And so I'm not so sure that he's going to find a negotiating partner in Washington or somebody in Washington who is less likely to give this loan than Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, even if Trump does get elected. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, October 8th. CIA says, all right, my mistake there started with the wrong order. This article is actually from October 9th. Biden and Harris will speak with Netanyahu to discuss attacking Iran. So President Biden and Vice President Harris spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on Wednesday to discuss Israel's plans to attack Iran in retaliation for an Iranian missile barrage fired last week. Iran fired nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel in response to multiple Israeli escalations, including the assassination of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and that was at the end of July. Israeli officials told Axios that Israel's retaliation would likely involve strikes on Iranian military sites coupled with covert operations similar to the Haniyeh assassination. NBC News reported on Tuesday that the U.S. was considering supporting Israel's attack with direct airstrikes of its own, although U.S. officials said intelligence support was more likely. The U.S. has also committed to defending Israel from any Iranian response. The White House readout of the Biden-Harris call with Netanyahu said Biden affirmed his ironclad commitment to Israel's security and condemned unequivocally Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel on October 1st. According to Axios, Netanyahu will meet with his security cabinet on Thursday to get approval for military action in Iran, which Israeli officials believe will likely lead to full-blown war. Iran has vowed it would respond to any Israeli attack. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant was due to visit Washington on Wednesday, but his trip was postponed. According to Israeli military, Netanyahu wanted to speak with Biden and get approval from the security cabinet to attack Iran before Gallant's trip. And I read this morning that meeting, the Israeli security cabinet meeting, was happening this morning, Thursday the 10th. And so if you got the green light from Biden, gets the green light from the security cabinet, I would assume Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we start to see the Israeli response. There was a statement that Gallant made on Wednesday. A couple things. Let me say this first. So Gallant issued a threat to Iran on Wednesday saying the Iranian attack was aggressive but inaccurate. In contrast, our attack will be deadly, pinpoint accurate, and most importantly, surprising. They will not know what happened or how it happened. They will just see the results. And so some people thought that this meant it would be a more of an assassination style attack rather than just an airstrike. I think it's possible we see both. I think it's unlikely that Israel doesn't carry out some form of airstrike against some Iranian targets, see some explosions, even if it's not in Iranian territory, it's in Iraq or Syria, and then we have assassinations within Iran. I would be very surprised if Israel didn't go with some sort of actual kinetic missile airstrike style response on Iran. Most likely, almost for sure within Iranian territory, but if not, IRGC targets in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, but they bomb Lebanon all the time. So I think particularly Iraq would be the big statement attack there. All right. Next up here, Israel kills 45 more Palestinians in Gaza, escalates war in northern Gaza. So Gaza's health ministry said Wednesday that Israeli forces had killed at least 45 Palestinians and wounded 130 in the previous 24-hour period, as Israel working to cleanse northern Gaza of Palestinians. The latest violence brings the ministry's recorded death toll since October 7th, 2023 to 42,010, and the number of wounded to 97,720. The figures do not include the estimated 10,000 or more Palestinians who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. A group of American healthcare workers who have volunteered in Gaza said they believe over 118,000 Palestinians have been killed, a number that accounts for starvation deaths and deaths of other indirect causes. On Wednesday, the Israeli military escalated operations in northern Gaza, where it is carrying out an ethnic cleansing campaign based on an outline known as the General's Plan. On Sunday, the Israeli military ordered the estimated 300,000 Palestinians leaving in northern Gaza to head south. The Israelis estimate that there's between 150,000 and 250,000 Palestinians in northern Gaza. 300,000 is the more common number I see used. The Palestinians will often put the number a little bit higher at 400,000. So the renewed Israeli assault in the north has been focused on the Jabalia refugee camp. The Israeli military's Arab language spokesman issued fresh evacuation orders for the camp and all of northern Gaza on Wednesday. So the spokesman said, "We reiterate our call that you in the Jabalia camp evacuate your homes and shelters immediately. This is your chance. Move now without delay from your shelters and homes to the southern Gaza Strip." While the Israeli military has been ordering Palestinians to leave Jabalia, it has also been firing at those trying to flee. CNN, I'll say that again, reported on Tuesday that Israeli drones were shooting those who were trying to evacuate. So this cannot be dismissed as just anti-Semitic propaganda or anything like that. This is the most mainstream U.S. media saying that drones were firing at everyone that passes by on the road. The people were shot right in front of me. My brother and I tried to help the injured to get to the hospitals, but a little girl was shot in the neck and her father was also injured. Again, quadcopter drones are just firing at the people who are trying to follow along the Israeli evacuation orders. So this is meant to kill the people who are complying with the ethnic cleansing orders. It's so disgusting. And it really shows that Israel's plan here is to decrease, and significantly so, the population of Gaza. If they just want the people of Gaza to leave, then they would happily let them flee to southern Gaza to get them closer to Egypt, where I think they ultimately would like to see the Palestinians displaced to, all the way from all of what Israel wants as its territory, right? But they're shooting those people, which is going to encourage other people to stay. And then Israel is going to say, well, now we have to kill them because they're embedded with the terrorists and that they're human shields and we have no choice, blah, 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 blah. And that really suggests to me that the purpose here is to keep the people in their homes in northern Gaza so they could slaughter them there, especially since most of the journalists have been killed and there's not a whole lot of ability for people to report what's going on actually. And that's actually a great place for us to segue over to my Libertarian Institute debrief from October 8th, 2024. It is Israel arrests American journalists. So I write, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's bloody war on journalism continues to rage on. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, 123 Palestinians were killed in the first year of the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. Gaza's media office puts the death toll significantly higher at 175. Many journalists appear to have been targets of Israeli bombs, but Tel Aviv has gone further, targeting family members of the media. On Wednesday, antiwar.com contributor Ramzi Baroud says his sister had been added to the 118,000 Palestinians killed by Israel in little over a year. And he had this nice tweet and message, condolences to Ramsey. He has been an absolute prolific and one of the most important writers that we've had over the past year. And I know he's lost quite a few members of his family and extended family, and I'm sure losing his only sister is really an unimaginable loss. I don't even want to think about what it would mean for. I got one brother, and if I lost him, it would be horrific, especially, in this sense, amid the slaughter of and genocide of his people in Gaza. So Israel has additionally gone after other journalists outside of Gaza. The latest victim of Netanyahu's assault on the media is the Gray Zone's Jeremy Lafredo, who was arrested on Tuesday and has been held for, as of the writing, 24 hours. I think we're going on 36 to 48 as of the recording of this podcast. It appears Lafredo was one of 4 journalists who was arrested and had their phones confiscated. It remains to be seen if the White House will directly intervene to protect Lafredo. If history is any indication, Lafredo is in danger. While Joe Biden ran to end Trump's war on journalism, he allowed America's allies to kill American members of the media. Gonzalo Lira died after being held in a Ukrainian prison for several months. The White House has had numerous opportunities to pressure Kiev to deport Lira back to the U.S., but chose to allow the Ukrainians to kill him through medical neglect. In 2022, an Israeli sniper murdered Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in the West Bank. The White House did nothing to hold Israel responsible. The Biden administration dropped the issue after Tel Aviv investigated itself and found Israeli forces did nothing wrong. Will Biden take action and force Netanyahu to release Lafredo? I end my statement here. And I know for any updates on this, I would consider the primary source and the guide to really follow would be Matt Blumenthal, the editor of the Gray Zone. I'm sure there are other people who are doing accurate reporting, but just, out of sensitivity for the issue, I would certainly lean on Matt's reporting here, because he's going to make sure that, the way he reports it is a way that doesn't endanger Lafredo any more than he already is. And, is working, I'm sure, behind the scenes and in public to try to secure his release. All right, so last article up here today, October 9th, antiwar.com. Israeli strikes in Lebanon killed 22 people in 24 hours. So Lebanon's health ministry said Wednesday that Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon killed 22 people and wounded 80 in the previous 24-hour period. Strikes on Wednesday included attack on southern villages, which killed 5 rescue workers. Lebanon's state civil defense agency said they were killed in an Israeli strike that targeted the civil defense center in a southern village as they were on the alert to receive emergency calls. Israel has repeatedly targeted Lebanese first responders in the past year. 10 firefighters were killed by Israeli strikes on Monday, bringing the total number of rescue workers Israel has killed in Lebanon since last October to over 100. And try to imagine how this would go over in the United States if, when somebody was bombing your community, they weren't just bombing homes and things like that. They were bombing the ambulances and the fire stations and things like this. And so, now when, let's say, a home gets bombed and the 2 or 3 structures nearby get set on fire, no one comes when you call 911 because all the firefighters have been murdered by Israel. I mean, this is what the people of Lebanon are living to, and obviously, I'm sure is very difficult to tolerate and live under. So Lebanon's health ministry said that the latest violence has brought the total number of people killed in Lebanon since October 8th, 2023 to 2,141, and the number of wounded to 10,099. At least 1,323 people, including over 100 children and many other civilians, have been killed since September 23rd, so just over 2 weeks. Also on Wednesday, Hezbollah fired another 150 rockets into northern Israel and killed 2 Israeli civilians in a northern town. The incident marked the first time Israeli civilians were killed by a Hezbollah attack since early August, when an errant Israeli interceptor struck a student. Hezbollah has been able to step up rocket attacks on Israel despite the massive Israeli bombardment of Lebanon, and invading Israeli troops have faced stiff resistance on the ground. It's estimated that 15,000 Israeli troops have now entered southern Lebanon. The U.S. initially claimed it sought a ceasefire in Lebanon, but now opposes the idea and has expressed strong public support for the Israeli military operations in Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened Lebanon with face the same destruction in Gaza if the Lebanese people don't free the country from Hezbollah. So lots of concerns here. A very dark episode of conflicts of interest. That's where I'm going to wrap up today. Everyone, thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with one more show tomorrow. I am planning to interview Dave DeCamp for tomorrow's show. You won't want to miss that one, so be sure you subscribe to the show somewhere.